You have a lot of Muslims, I think, who have this view that, oh, an Islamic economy, it'd be just like capitalism. So, it'd be like the free market, but without interest, and alcohol and pork would be haram or something. But we have this history of regulation of like, no, there is potential for abuse. The position that sellers stand in relation to the public is one in which they could harm people a lot. And so there needs to be oversight and regulation. That's always been a part of our history.
Nice, mashallah. Wow, that was really cool. Okay. Okay, so I think you brought up another thing. You feel very icky about marketing. We can give it whatever euphemism works. But you said something interesting, which is you took your academic background and you guys actually did some research into, you know, just descriptively like how I think Muslim societies went about doing this. I'm actually very curious about that. One, because it's an interesting avenue to go down. And two, because it interests me personally. I feel like this is just not an area we really dive into and look for. I don't know how much information is available. So I'm kind of curious about that. What did you find?
Yeah, I find it really fascinating as well. Let me preface that I did not do some deep dive dissertation, any research. It was just a little bit of a jump into a couple of things. I did a research paper. I usually use academic research as just like what I want to learn as a Muslim about our
That's the way
history.
to do it.
And then I'm like, yeah, there's some academic angle here. I'll give it to them. But really,
Yeah.
for me, I just wanted to learn about this history as a Muslim. So I did a paper on the history of the Muhtasib, who was kind of the market overseer
Mhm.
in terms of market regulator. The Prophet ﷺ appointed several from the market of Medina during his lifetime, and they've been a fixture of Islamic cities throughout our history, that there would be this person or group of people who would patrol the market and regulate the people who would sell all the sort of various industries. And they have these handbooks. So that's the historical resource that you get to actually work with and do your research on, is sort of the guidebooks of the muhtasib, like how to regulate the market. And they're divided up into industries: the meat fryers and the bakers and the fabric sellers. And you get a picture of a Muslim market in an old traditional city, Cairo in the 12th century, just from these handbooks and based on the rules that they would need to impose on the sellers. And it's just fascinating. I think it's so cool for so many reasons. One being that, you have a lot of Muslims, I think, who have this view that, oh, an Islamic economy would be just like capitalism, it would be like the free market, but without interest, and alcohol and pork would be haram or something. But
Yeah.
the free market. But we have this history of regulation of like, no, there is potential for abuse. The position that sellers stand in relation to the public is one in which they could harm people a lot. And so there needs to be oversight and regulation. That's always been a part of our history. So I find that really fascinating, just like on its face. But then the rules that they impose on people, there are so many around protection of air quality. The bakers had to have filters on their chimneys. Honesty, not adulterating products, not mixing in lower quality things with higher quality things. The structure of the transactions, of course, abiding by Islamic law of Muhammadat, and so much else. By the way, as a side point, there's always a moral element to this regulation as well. The muhtasibs not only oversaw the market, but also making sure the muezzin doesn't give adhan at the wrong time. For example, making sure that there aren't preachers saying strange things in the streets, sort of anything in relation to the public welfare. You find always information about restraint that sellers have to practice when it comes to bringing in customers to their shops. And I found this completely paralleled what our artisans told me the market used to be like in Tunis. Various marketplaces in Tunis used to be exactly what these books would say, which is that it's fine to display things outside of your store, but it's not fine to accost people and force them in. It's fine to give an invitation, sort of say, here's what I sell. You know, it looks so nice on the outside, and I'm going to wait for you in here. And if you're interested or you want to ask more questions, you come inside. So that's what I always think of. If you compare that to what we do to people today,
Especially
like,
with technology and how so much of it is built on advertising. So then the incentive is just to digitally accost people.
we're digitally accosting people nonstop. And that's one of the things we decided very early on was we do not pay for intrusive advertisements of any kind, like advertisements that show up to people who did not basically go looking for advertisements. So we don't pay for ads on Instagram, for Facebook, we don't pay for social ads. We don't pay for anything that shows up in a place where people are there for a different reason. And you can say, oh, everyone expects to see ads on Instagram, but that's not why we go to Instagram. I think we'd all prefer to see less ads on Instagram. The data mining, the intrusiveness, you can't even go about a single hour of your life probably without someone taking up space in your mind to sell you something and make you desire something that you probably never even wanted or thought about needing. If you just had a day of freedom from all of that, you'd probably be much more satisfied with everything in your life. But the fact that we can just chase after people nonstop and force ourselves down their throats and make them covet these random gadgets they never even needed or wanted. It's very sick. It's a very twisted way to live a society. To set up a marketplace, I find it abhorrent. I just didn't want that at all. But I wanted some way because I think what our artisans create is beautiful. I think a lot of people want it and would be looking for it. And so I just want to be there when people are looking for us or for something like us, which is why I love in-person stuff. We go to marketplaces, we do pop-up events, we go to conventions, because people go to shop. When people go to the bazaar at Isna, they're excited to go find Muslim brands that do the type of things that they're looking for. So I love those. We've done search engine ads once or twice. I just don't love paying for ads in general. We just haven't, one, because we have no money, but also because I just love the organicness that we've been blessed to experience. So we put ourselves out there, like we're on Instagram, we have our Vimeo, we have our website, but we think intentionally about where we put ourselves, just being there for people to find, extending an invitation rather than shoving ourselves into people's mental space. And then we also think about the experience of when people do come to us, when they do interact with our materials, when they come to our website, what do they experience? We think about that a lot, and we try to be really intentional about that. That's why if you go to our URL, it's tunicoasis.com.
Link in the description.
People always ask about Oasis, or they think the name of the brand is like Tunic Oasis or something. It's probably, I don't know, not the best branding, but very early on, we had this image. Many of our artisans live in oases. There's something so beautiful about an oasis. You're in a desert, right? There's nothing alive. Like there's just flat emptiness for miles and miles. You have no idea where you could get water. And then subhanAllah, out of nowhere, God creates this refuge where you have abundance and beauty and peace. And you have this place of refuge where you're safe within that space. So we think about that image and publish a journal called the Oasis Journal, where we share people's writings on sacred anti-capitalism. We want to be a space where people come and they can escape what I see as like the desert of modern industrial capitalism. They can come to our website, and even when they're on our website, they're not constantly being sold to. We have the shop tab, But then we have the Imagine tab where we publish a lot of our articles and different ideas about the type of world that we could build together. We have our Connect tab where you can go on all of our blogs and just see videos of artisans doing crafts. You know, there's not like products linked on every page. There's not pop-ups jumping out at you. There's not language of buy it now. We'll never use language of urgency or pressure. And we just try to describe things just as peacefully as possible. And I love to always think about if people come to the website and they don't buy a single thing, will they be benefited from that experience, inshallah? And that's our intention always with our offerings, our marketing materials.
I love that, just because, you know, my own profession is I'm a front-end web developer. And I used to work for Wayfair in Boston. I got laid off. So Wayfair, for those who don't know, is like a big e-commerce company. And I was on the team that did the search box at the top. And we'd have projects where literally we were just putting the items somebody had recently seen as images on the search bar. And then they just have data metrics of like, we increased revenue by like some ridiculously small number that was like 0.02%. But because it's Wayfair, it translates to like $1 million or something like that. Those were the kinds of decisions being made, and that's why they were being made. There was a team of engineers and also designers that doing user testing and just trying to make these decisions. The amount of effort and money put it into for that intention of just maximizing profit. I love that unfortunately, I feel like a lot of endeavors in our community tend to skip the design and the user experience a little bit. So you're left with very difficult to navigate sites. The intentions usually are pretty good, but there's a little bit of excellence lacking there. But I love that you pay attention to that. I think that's actually very important, because it's part of the way in an online world where your clients, your customers are all over the world. That's the way they interact with you. It's your presence online. And that it says a lot about you, about the experience, certainly. But yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
Inshallah. Thanks. We are it's funny because anytime anyone with expertise in these areas tries to give us advice, we're kind of doing everything wrong. Like everything that they say you should do. You need to do A and B testing. You need to install Google Pixel, constantly be monitoring people's path through the website. Any little minor inefficiencies and whatever, you need to take it out of their path. Increase your conversion rates and stuff. We're doing the opposite. I love that.
I don't know if the expression is called the tyranny of expertise, but people they have their expertise in this place, and then that just gets applied everywhere. This is more of a secular thing, but I believe it's Marty Neumeier. He's supposed to be like the big branding guru a lot of people in the branding space go to, and he has a book called Zag. So the basic principle of that book can be summarized in a sentence, which is when other people zig, you should zag. When everyone is doing something a certain way, the way you stand out is to do something completely different. So in a way, even from a secular perspective, you might be doing something right. So
now I feel validated.
For the quote unquote practical minded people who might have something to say, there's always an argument in the opposite direction.
Yeah. That's good. Alhamdulillah.
All right. Oh man, there's just so much to go into. I especially love the developing real relationships with people. You're building the local economy there. There's this intergenerational effort with your mom. There's a lot to talk about, but we're at close to time. So what I'm thinking maybe is to look to the future a little bit. What's on your mind now? What's the short-term goals that you want to hit? You're at 5% now. what's 10%? What's 15%? What's 50%? Let's hear a little bit about the vision for the future, inshallah.
I'm just going to write stuff down for a second because there's so much running through my head.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's funny because you said what's 50%, what's higher than 5%, but the reality is that I like what we're doing now way better than the vision that I had in the beginning. So I'd be fine if it went down to 0, Yani. Alhamdulillah. It's 5% for good reason, because I was corrected. We've, I think, created something that's adapted to what people actually want from us locally, what they need from us. So Alhamdulillah, I'm happy for that percentage to stay where it is. But we have a lot that we want to do and that we want to improve on. And our task board on Teams is very big and very wide. And there's some things that are on there that have been on there for perhaps over a year. But alhamdulillah, if you'd asked me that last year at this time, I would have said our goal was literally to survive, because last July was the coup that I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, and the democratic government of Tunis was overthrown by a dictator. It might sound like a common story to where almost we're numb to it.
Yeah.
But for us, it was devastating and made us feel unsure whether we could even continue the project, because my parents had been living here. As I said, when the coup happened, they happened to be in the United States, and my father hasn't returned since then. So he has the suitcase that he had with him when he was visiting my sister, and his life savings, his home that he lived with his parents here, everything that he owns materially and that my parents own is here in Tunis, and they live in the US and they're not able to return.
This is like a result of their past protesting and the like.
Yeah, when they came back to Tunis, they were very involved in the political process. My dad, runs a center, a nonprofit that does citizenship trainings. He's involved in the constitution writing process. It's been my parents' kind of life's work. It was the dream of their life to be able to work on the democratic transition in Tunis. They were involved, and they just don't feel safe returning for some good reasons, which is a whole other story. So we had to suddenly go completely remote. My mom was like our person on the ground, and we had a team. We have sort of an office here. We do all the responding to customers and all the kind of materials that we create, and the order shipping and fulfillment, the quality control. It's kind of like our little headquarters here, because our artisans are dispersed all over the country and they work from their homes. They own their own means of production. We wanted to maintain that independence. So we have just kind of our central node here. And we had just hired a few people, and I had like a few months of training with them when everything shut down. We didn't want to make any moves. We didn't want to call attention to ourselves in case it used Tunic as kind of a retaliation against my parents or something. And so we just didn't even know if we could continue. We had just hired these people, and now they had to run the whole thing by themselves without us in the country at all. And we had to shift everything to Teams. And so we're doing everything virtual and having to schedule meetings and stuff, which we had never done before, and create a task board and create a way to manage work completely remotely. It's just so difficult for work like ours, which is so physical and material.
Yeah, and in person too, like just the early part of your story, personal relationship. It's very hard to do that remotely. You can try. I'm trying, but it's hard. It's definitely hard.
It's hard when your artisans don't even, a lot of them, you can't call them when you're out of the country. So we had to call the people in the office on a video chat with the internet, and then they call the artisans on the phone and have to do this transition where it's like, hey, I work with Layla and her daughter. That's how they know us. None of them know what Tunic is. Well, a few of them know that the name is Tunic. The name of the thing we do is Tunic.
It's not this ephemeral brand. It's the people.
Yeah, for most of them, it's like Layla and her daughter, the project that we do with them. Our people in the office had to be like, yeah, I work with Layla and her daughter. How are you doing? My name is so-and-so. I'm going to be your point of contact from now on. So when I finally got the chance to come here this August, alhamdulillah, and visit several of our artisans, I hadn't spoken to them in over a year at that point. Oh, wow. So it was hard and it was very tough. So the fact that we're still alive, to me, is just miraculous, alhamdulillah, what the team that we had in the office here were able to do, and what they put in, and what the artisans did over the past year to keep everything going. They had to do quality control for products that they had never seen before. They're trying to show me stuff on video, like, is this normal? Is this normal? Or is this bad? And I was like, does it feel soft? How itchy is it? They're like, oh, it feels scratchy. I'm like, really scratchy? What kind of like how we were doing our quality control, and alhamdulillah. They were so wonderful. The fact that we survived that and were able to figure out a way to work through that. And now all the people, all the team in Tunis have wonderful relationships with all the artisans.
Yeah.
They all know each other by name. And every
Yeah.
time we call the artisans, they're like, you've got a great set of girls. Everyone you
Yeah.
have in the office is so wonderful.
Allahu Akbar. That's great.
Um,
May Allah
yeah,
make things easier for your parents and for the people of Tunis and
I mean,
save them from the oppression. It's interesting too, because even in this, I can see how certain roles that were like your mom's before are now being delegated to you. Certain roles that were yours are now having to be delegated to this team. And that ends up always being part of any institution you build is you have to and bring kind of the next group of people if you want to build something that will last beyond your lifetime even. I think that's something that people miss out a lot. Sometimes there's a bit of micromanaging that happens in some institutions or people. It's very hard for people to let go. I guess in this case it was out of your hands, like you're forced to it, but
alhamdulillah, I think that's true. I think I wouldn't have been able to do it if it was up to me. Alhamdulillah, God forced me into it as He does, and alhamdulillah, it's been great. Sorry, you asked about our goals and long-term goals.
No, no, it's okay. This was actually a good point because I'd forgotten to take a note about asking about the coup, but I think that's definitely something that's been very important this last year for you and your family, not just for the business, but also for you all personally. So it was good to hear about that.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, we survived it. We continue to survive it. It's changed a lot of things about how we work, but we have so many goals and we're still moving forward. I pulled up our board of projects and ideas we want to do, and I'm trying to pick some what I want to share. The things that we're always working on, we have a column of tasks called production, recurring and open tasks, new sales channels, or whatever. That's what we're always doing. But what I love is a column called research and development, which is where we're just trying to come up with new ideas. Like, is it possible to work with the materials that we have to create X? Some random idea that we have. One that we're working on recently is people have asked, those really thick padded prayer rugs that are out there? We have wool prayer rugs that we designed and that have been, alhamdulillah, very well received. Lately, we've been getting a lot of requests of like my elderly mom or something in her knees. And do you have anything really, really padded and cushioned, just the thickest thing you can get? And we were like racking our brains trying to figure out a way to do it. You can weave a really thick rug, but it never gives you, and it's soft and it'll be comfortable to put your knees on, but it'll never give you the fluffiness where you kind of sink into something that people were asking for. But then we thought about it. We tried different samples. Nothing was working out. And then an idea we have recently, which we, by the way, have not made the sample for it yet. So we don't know if this is actually going to work, but
This
we're
is
working.
very early R&D.
Early stages. Yeah, I just
Scoop
want to give just like an image
disclaimer.
of the types of things we do. We're sort of constantly just like, let's try this wacky idea and see if it works. And a lot of the times it just doesn't. And we have all these failed samples all over the office. But when it does, then it's really exciting and it's a new way to connect with materials. And it's another subhanallah moment. So one thing we're thinking of is, have you ever seen a sheepskin that still has the hair on it?
I haven't seen many sheep. But
If
sure.
anyone knows the image of a sheepskin rug or something that it's very fluffy and it has all the hair still
Yeah, okay.
attached to the skin, to the leather, which is tanned. There are these traditional tanners every year after Eid, they tan the traditional skins and they leave the wool on, and it's very soft. It's very, very cushioned because the wool hasn't yet been woven into the compacted form of a fabric. So it still has that fluffiness that people want. I had thought about that before, but they come in these wonky shapes and there was nothing that would be rectangular. But then I was like, what if we just take several of these sheepskins and we cut them up and we sew them into a rectangular shape? And that will look really wonky and ugly. But then we can wrap that whole thing in a prayer rug and an encasing so that it'll be like a prayer rug and then it'll be a layer of sheepskin fur that you won't even see, and it'll just be really soft and padded, but it'll look very refined and closed. I don't know if people can imagine this with me, but this is the vision. We found a traditional tanner of sheepskins. We bought a few. We took them to a leather artisan worker. He's cutting and sewing them up as we speak. It's very thick, hard to work with, so he's not sure if he'll be able to pull it off, but we left him with one of our prayer rugs, and we should have a sample next week, inshallah.
Oh, wow.
We'll see if it works, but if that doesn't work, we'll come up with the next idea. We're always having this experimentation with materials, and we have a lot of other things we want to try. We're trying to develop a natural black dye, for example. That's a color that we haven't yet been able to achieve through plant dyeing. We're trying to develop a way to dye some of our leather. All of our leather products right now are the sort of pinkish nude color that is the neutral color of leather after it's been traditionally tanned. We'd love to offer other natural colors and see if we can dye leather the way we dye wool. We have a list of these sort of things where we're just like, let's just try to work with the material in this way. It must be possible because people did it before.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that's been lost. So there's a lot that we want to revive and recreate within the bounds of our ethical constraints. Long term, I see the vision when people ask me, do you want tunic to be huge? Or like, where do you want tunic to go? I think, just as a final thought, I compare it a lot to the organic farming movement. The problem in the farming industry is industrial agriculture. It's big, huge monocrop farms that are bad for the environment. The solution is not a big, huge organic farm.
Which they have started now. So they've gotten into the organic industry too.
Right. But the real solution, the thing that's so beautiful, is local farmers and small scale farming. There's all these like academic papers that are written on. They're like, yeah, is the next big thing like micro farming? Is that the solution? And that's like the cutting edge of science. And I'm like, you know, the way people have been doing it for like hundreds of years, that's something that bothers me sometimes. It happens in the fashion space as well, where people are like, how can we do something sustainable? We just have to innovate and come up with new ideas. And I'm like, you know, people did this for hundreds of years. People created clothing and farmed food without destroying the planet. And maybe if we just give the respect that indigenous communities deserve to them, to their traditions, to what they've preserved for the world, then we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. But I see a lot of similarities. Fashion at its core starts with farming, begins with agriculture. And I see the same scale is what is required. So I don't want Tunic to be some big, huge, sustainable fashion brand. I want us to be a model that can be replicated on a small scale in communities around the world. I don't want us to be the solution for everything. We don't have all the materials here, right? We only work with wool. We don't have linen. Linen doesn't grow in Tunis, things like that. There needs to be this development of this diffuse, decentralized ecosystem, right? Of people who are doing this locally and in community and are providing for their community's needs. So that's my dream of what I want to see for the fashion world, for how we create clothing and garments for our lives. And I think it's pretty similar to what needs to happen in farming and in so many other spaces and industries as well.
Yeah. I can't help but imagine that a lot of people have probably asked you the question of, how do I get started? Like, how do I recreate the model? And it's probably hard because you talked about the indigenous economy and helping out. And there's probably a whole podcast episode we could do just about retaining the economic wealth of a community within that community rather than extracting it out. There's been lots of studies about how a local grocery store does a lot better of a job of keeping wealth circulating within the community, as opposed to like the Walmarts and these things like really just extract it out, because it's so just particularized to the communities that you're working with. What kind of advice do you give people who are interested in this space, in getting started in some way, and maybe in recreating the model?
Basically, the advice is to focus on local community, local needs, and building relationships first, but to always center your commitment and your intention. So it's not just you go in and you sort of romanticize local artisans and you do whatever they want and they're infallible. It's a partnership and you have something to offer. They have something immensely valuable to offer. And to stick to your general values while allowing your specific vision to accommodate the local context, not just them, but also the local materials, the environment. All of that will dictate what you're able to do, what you're able to produce, the products that you put out, but really to center the relationships and to always think of it as a partnership.
Yeah.
There's nothing too rigid, I think. Just don't do harm.
SubhanAllah, don't do harm, don't be evil. Google doesn't even try to hide it anymore. I think they got rid of that catchphrase or whatever it was. It's simple advice, but in practice, it's no doubt it's very difficult. I'm kind of curious. This is just one question I have. When we use phrases like anti-capitalist, there tends to be a lot of people with very strong opinions on the internet. Do you get a lot of flack from? Do people just start ranting, or does it just end up more secondary just because you're just focusing on your products and getting it out there, and people don't busy themselves too much of it? Have you managed to avoid the social media battles that always occur?
No, we haven't, but it's been sort of a up and down waves of responses. People who love what we do and are kind of like, can you just drop the anti-capitalism? You don't have to talk about it that way or whatever. But they love the intention, the spirit that we're living. Get a lot of kind of Twitter people. We're not actually on Twitter too much. I think there's a sort of Twitter type of person who, they'll say, how can you be anti-capitalist when you're like a business and you're selling products and stuff, and you're just using that as an attention grabbing word. But I think it all comes from really just a confusion of terms that people have. I think a lot of powerful groups have been successful in convincing us that capitalism is just the natural evolution of any kind of economy. It's synonymous with just a free market, doing business and trade. Any kind of business and trade that is generally free and not controlled by the government is capitalism. It's really just a misunderstanding of the term. Capitalism is not that. It is a very particular, historically contingent way of organizing an economy in which capital is centralized in the hands of a very small number of people through a forced transition of removing people from land, turning people into wage workers. The vast majority of society becomes wage workers and doesn't own anything, and all they can sell is their labor, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole set of conditions that are particular to what capitalism is that have not existed in history and are unique to the system that we live today. And I think it's just a confusion of terms. Like, the system we live in today is so good at making itself seem natural and blocking our sight from even being able to imagine something different. Yeah. It's either communism or capitalism. We can't even picture.
That's always the binary. And you're right about the terms. I have found, and I've really just started studying this because I really want to understand this well. There are not that many great definitions of it, even amongst academics that I've come across so far. I don't know, maybe if you have. What you're describing now, one can say, okay, maybe there's like the theoretical capitalism, like what the theorists say it is and what we're in. And then there's the descriptive, it's almost like studying religion, right? Like there is the normative study of religion, which is what the indigenous teaching is supposed to be. And then there's the descriptive lived version of religion, which for the anthropologists is just, it's everyone. It doesn't matter like how heterodox or strange it's going on. It's just describing what is on the ground, what is actually lived. And what you're describing is, if we're going to say that capitalism is the greatest system and that we're living in it, then okay, what are we living in? And that's what you're addressing here. There's definitely not a lack probably of clear thinking. And there's also, and I've said this before, there's a lot of armchair theorizing.
Yeah.
I think, subhanAllah, it's great that you were pushed in this direction to really put these things into practice. You said from your early childhood, you were taught to bring everything into practice and apply it, which is great because people can say all they want about the theory, but this is the model that we're trying to figure out. I'm wondering if you have any resources about some of these topics that you recommend to people, to maybe not necessarily lay people, but maybe lay people who like to read. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, people are always at different levels. Some people can dig into like monographs and just get a lot of edification out of it. Some people can just listen to podcasts and that's it. That's how they get their information, unfortunately. So I was just wondering if there's anything in particular or a book recommendation that Muslims should read. This is a good resource to go into. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I know exactly what I want people to read. So we put out things that I think are not incomplete, are not complete. They're very incomplete. There's a lot more that I think needs to be produced from a Muslim perspective. And for me, one of the goals of my life is to contribute to an intellectual movement of a Muslim moral economy and economic theory, what that looks like from a holistic grounding that really has its roots in our tradition, our history, and can see beyond the binary we were talking about earlier. I don't think that literature exists yet, but I mentioned earlier, we started the Oasis Journal. We have short, bite-sized articles that dive into specific issues. We have an article called The Sacred Anti-Capitalist Ethic. It's very short, just kind of a vision piece. These are for people to dip their toe in. We have a collection of 40 verses on sacred anti-capitalism. They're no commentary. They're literally just one verse per page with a title, and it's 40 pages. These are verses that we constantly think about, and they deal with either commerce and trade specifically, or with ideas of community, or with really the essence of our faith, like what is our soul, our purpose as humanity. They deal with the natural world and our stewardship of the planet. We have that collection. It's what inspires me and our work. I think in the future, I'd love to develop that with some scholars and maybe in like an anthology of maybe some commentaries on what those verses mean in practice for this type of work.
Are there any scholars listening?
Please, we need you. I purposely didn't want to write words to accompany verses because it just goes too close to tafsir that I'm not qualified to do. So that's why it's really just one verse per page. It's 40 verses, and they speak for themselves. But I think that needs to be done by someone who has the qualifications in the science of tafsir. But for people who want to deep dive into capitalism, understanding the historical contingency of this economic system, all of its pitfalls, how it is not a good economic system, both from efficiency perspectives, from distributive justice perspective, from environmental perspective, from every perspective that we could possibly care about as Muslims, what it does to us as people. But this is not a Muslim book, because such a Muslim book doesn't exist yet. The People's Guide to Capitalism. That's the name of the book. It's by Hadas here. You just have to read it. It's so good. It basically takes Marx's foundational texts and explains them, because Marx is really hard to read, explains them in, I think, an accessible way, and applies the theories to conditions that we see today in the 21st century. And there's a lot that we would differ with, obviously, as Muslims, but as a historical analysis, I think it's a very useful text to engage with. I wouldn't encourage people to read it uncritically. Always, we take knowledge where we can find it. We filter it as Muslims. But I think it's an excellent text. It's very accessible. It is fun, I think. It's fun to read. It's not boring. It's not super academic. So read The People's Guide to Capitalism, please.
That's a great recommendation. We will add it to the description. That will exist soon. Doesn't exist yet, but it will. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
All right. We got to cover a lot of ground, alhamdulillah. I think we're in a good spot to come towards the end. And inshallah, I'd love to have you on again to maybe talk more about these types of topics more in depth and give us an update on how Tunic is doing, inshallah, and season 2 or 3 or however far we get to, God willing.
Inshallah. See you guys in season 10.
Yeah. Inshallah. So the last thing that I like to ask is, I like to give an opportunity. There's a saying, those who have not thanked people have not thanked Allah. So something I'm experimenting with in the format is, at the end, if there's anyone you'd like to express gratitude towards, to do a shout out for, maybe.
That is too long of a question. It's a beautiful question. I'm actually so grateful for that opportunity, but now I have a duty to not leave anyone out. SubhanAllah. First and foremost, we thank Allah for all of the blessings of our lives, for being born and given the blessing of Islam and life. I think on this particular project, more than most people, which is everyone in the world, I can thank my parents and I can thank my mom because she's my partner, alhamdulillah, on this whole project.
But we have to bring her on for the interview in season 10, inshallah.
We have to, inshallah. She's so wonderful. And she's actually a pharmacist by training, but she didn't work for a large period of her life. And I remember the day in particular when we were doing some tunic stuff, and she turned to me and said, I feel like this is what I was meant to be doing. I mean, to hear that from your own mom on a project that you started with her when she's like 58, yani it's just, alhamdulillah, it was the best. So I'm so grateful for her, alhamdulillah. And all the people I spoke about in the beginning, all the friends who encouraged me and mentioned those things to me and said, no, you should apply. It's a great idea. No, you should do that. All the encouragement that we've received. I have to mention my husband. Alhamdulillah. He's our unofficial chief branding officer. He always jokes. He's our CBO. He's done so much. He was secretly our early model when we couldn't pay anyone to model for us. He's dealt with inventory all over our home. He's dealt with me leaving him all the time to travel to Tunis. He's been, yani, I don't think I could ask for a more supportive person. He loves tunic and sees beauty in it. And he's done nothing but encourage me in all the stages of what we do. And he's been involved as well deeply. So I'm constantly bouncing ideas off of him. As much as I say, it won't be enough for what he's done for us. Alhamdulillah, for that man. And the rest of my family as well. I often test products on them. It was my brother who came up with From Sheep to Shop.
Oh.
Actually, he's the one who deserves all the credit. My family, my community, all the artisans that we work with, I've been given so much in this life, too much. And it's a duty for me to turn it into something that can be of service and be of benefit to others, inshallah. But I stand on so many shoulders and I've been given the benefits of so many other people who have been really generous. I don't want to take too long on this question, but alhamdulillah, I'm so grateful for all of those people. Thank you for having me and inviting me here today and together such a beautiful vision of building with barakah. It's just not talked about enough, and it's aspirational for me, inshallah, to be worthy of being on a podcast with such a title. So thank you.
I think that should be swapped. Now that I've had you on the podcast, I have to see it through. Now I don't have a choice.
Now you have to do it.
Yeah. The real talk though, I think a lot of the vision for building with barakah came from some of the interactions I had with Tunic, because I think it embodied a lot of thoughts I had about these ideas that were forming about having a God-centered intention and really just being actionable, really building something out and putting the effort there and then putting it out for the community to see. Because I feel it's not that we lack creative or intelligent people. I think what we're lacking in sometimes is a vision. And I think a lot of the times we are very easily swayed by role models and people who are doing amazing things. And so often those role models tend to be secular. If you've had any interest, even passing in business and maybe starting your own, the algorithms start forcing down all of these gurus down your throat, accosting you in the bazaar, so to speak. And you're filled with these ideas, certain ideas that are, some of them you could parse and maybe Islamicize it a little bit, but they're not rooted in our worldview. And it does have, I think, an impact on people. And I think it contributes quite a bit to the lack of focus. So my intention, inshallah, is to rectify that a little bit and to be of benefit to this burgeoning ecosystem that I think Tunic is going to be a part of, inshallah. Maybe not big in growth and size in the way the industrialist model is, but big, inshallah, in impact and in spirit, in barakah, really.
Inshallah.
So
Allah make it easy and tawfiq, inshallah, for you guys. I can't agree more. Can I just say one thing? I know we've been trying to wrap this up for so long, but I
Alhamdulillah.
just think if what you said, it's so important and so valuable, so needed. I see it so often when people constantly ask me questions, the framing of which I wish I could shake our community out of. I just wish I could just shake people out of this sort of limited thinking that we've been forced into. Our horizons are so narrow. People constantly ask me, how can I consume more ethically? Constantly ask me that question. And I love that. Of course, that's coming from the most beautiful place. But at the same time, the fact that that's the only question we ask, it's like, you're not only a consumer, you can be a producer. How can you not sit back and parse the choices of what you want to eat today and what you want to swallow up from the world? But what can you give? What can you go out and make? So I completely agree with what you said. I love that this is happening. I know there's so many people who want to intervene and create their offering for the world, produce something beautiful and with barakah. And like you said, I think if there's an inspiration for people, if there's sort of a movement, you build a discourse, these things happen organically, but there has to be people creating them. So this is, I think, going to be a beautiful, beautiful, huge part of that, inshallah.
Allahu Akbar, inshallah. All right, I think we'll close out with a dua, inshallah, and I'll give you an opportunity to add to that too, and then we'll go home. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praise is due to Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, the guider, the sustainer, the provider, the one who guides us on our destiny and puts the things in our path that we ourselves could not have conceived, and puts his nur in our hearts. Ya Allah,
Yeah.
guide us towards what is better, guide us towards what is best for us. Ya Allah, please make things easier for the people of Tunisia, for Iman's parents, and for all of the artisans and the workers and the people who are struggling against all kinds of odds. Ya Allah, make it easier for them, lift oppression from them, rectify the oppressor, and if that is not to happen, then replace with someone that is better, inshallah. Ya Allah, have mercy upon us, put barakah in all of our endeavors, guide us towards paths that are worthwhile, that lead us towards deeds that will weigh in our favor and not against us. Grant us good intentions and help us follow through with those intentions, and help us move and make this ecosystem, inshallah, sustainable and part of the community. If you'd like to add.
And I think the last of our du'as is to send blessings and peace upon the Prophet and his family, and our teacher and our beloved.
Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Allahumma salli ala اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد.